I'd like to speak about a code snippet that was shared by Remix core contributor Ryan Florence. This component here is a Remix 3 component, and I want to compare it to the equivalent React component. And this snippet here was shared by a React core contributor. So let's get into that. So let's look at the Remix component. To understand the Remix model, I guess you should have looked at the Remix Jam 2025 video. Then you would understand how this works, but I'll give you a quick refresher. In Remix, a component has two distinct parts. There is a setup scope. You can do your initialization stuff there. And you need to return a render function. And the render function is supposed to return the JSX. In React, you don't have two separate places. You have just one function. Yeah. And it has some interesting properties. So let's look at that. So how a component like this would be written. So let me give a summary of what this component is trying to do. What it's trying to do is set an interval based on a BPM prop. And if the BPM prop changes, he wants to reset the interval. That's about it in few words. But when we go through the details, we can understand why so much code is required. So let's go through line by line. The first line here is just for typing this keyword. This is a TypeScript trick. You can't actually have this argument name in JavaScript. In ECMAScript, you can't do it. So if you are writing plain JavaScript, you couldn't be able to write this. Yeah. So that's just a TypeScript trick to type this keyword. So ignore that. And the first argument here is actually the setup props. The setup props is like the initial props that your component gets. This will not change after that. And it's like this whole setup scope will only run once. From here to here, it only runs once. It will not run again. Yeah, until like even if the component unmounts, if a new component is created, yes, it's going to be running like this. So it's like like class constructor. That's how it's going to be. So the first line here is he takes the setup props BPM and assigns it to a let variable BPM. And the second one is interval. He puts it as 0 just for the types here. Yeah. And then he creates a function make interval, which the first thing it does is clears the previous interval, sets a new interval to console log the BPM. I will come to this signal aborted thing later on. Right now, just ignore it. I will explain to you at the last year. So creates that function for clearing the interval, creating the interval. He calls it the first time. So when the component is created, he starts the interval already. And when the component renders for the first time, I think this is how it's going to work. I couldn't test this in an actual code sandbox. I tried it, but I couldn't get it running. But I guess when the component runs for the first time, BPM updated BPM is equal to the BPM that was saved here. So it's the same setup props that is being run through the first time. So this code block will not run the first time. It will only return the JSX. When the BPM updates to a different value, then it comes here to the first line here, checks whether updated BPM is equal to the previous BPM. And this time it's going to say that it's not equal, and then it's going to update the BPM and call the make interval function again. The make interval function is going to clear the previous interval and create a new one. And the console log will log the new BPM. So I guess it's verbose, but straightforward. You can understand what the code is. Now let's look at the React example. This looks shorter, but there are some things that you might miss if you just do a glance. Yeah, the first line here is a use effect event, and use effect event is a new hook. I do not know what it is. It's only available in React 19.2, I guess. So most of you are not having that in React yet. I was thinking why this is even required, but let's ignore it. What it does is it takes this function and returns closure to it, I guess, like a wrapper to it, and um, we will come to why that wrapper is required. Let's continue with the rest of the logic. Use effect. Regardless of what the BPM value is, when the component mounts for the first time, the use effect is going to run. So it's going to set the interval here. Yeah. So now let's go back to this use effect event. I was thinking, why is this required? If I remove it, wouldn't the code work? And it works when the BPM changes. Um, it will run clear interval, and then a set interval will run to the new function. Yes. So there's no bugs here, right? So then things should work properly, right? But there is more to this it than this. If you had prop2 here, and if I were console logging prop2 here, yeah, and let's say BPM remain constant, but prop2 is continuously changing, it's like incrementing by 1 or something, then do you think this code will work? Some people just immediately say, yeah, this is going to work, there's no problem. But think through closures and JavaScript properly. Yeah? This wouldn't work. There's a reason for this. I'm going to show you, I'm going to prove it to you first that that code doesn't work. Yeah. So let me undo all that. So there's the code. There's a tick function. There's a prop2 here. I'm going to refresh. What I'm doing here is I'm changing the prop2 value every 5 seconds. I'm incrementing this 1 to 2. And 5 seconds have already passed and it has not changed here. So this code, like I told you, it doesn't work. And let me explain to you why it doesn't work. Yeah. And this goes into JavaScript and closures. Yeah. So when the function runs for the first time, you are creating a tick function. Just remember that this is like a create of a new function. This is like new function. If this was like object-oriented programming, it would look like new function. Yeah. So every time you do this, it's actually a new function. You're creating a new function here. And when you create a new function in JavaScript, it takes the closure to what is available at that point in time. So BPM was 1000 at that point in time, and prop2 was equal to 1 at that point in time. And then assigns that function to tick. Yeah. Use effect, it runs for the first time. It sets the interval to that function. And then onwards, BPM, like I told you, is constant. So it doesn't matter how many times I run this function, the use effect has only run once, and it will not run until I change BPM. BPM is constant, so it will never run again. So what this is happening here is all other runs, the second run, even if I change prop2, I'm creating a function tick, but I'm not using it anywhere and just discarding it, just returning the TSX. Not clearing the previous interval and setting the new interval, nothing. Yeah. So now does that explain to you why the prop2 is still stuck with the initial value? Because the set interval only ran once to a tick function that was created the very first render, which had a closure to the initial prop2, which is equal to 1. Right? So now this makes sense. Now there's a JavaScript explanation for this code, and this, like in hindsight, like yes, this makes sense. This is how it should have worked. But when I put use effect event back, let's put that back in there. This code just suddenly starts working. And the fix is more confusing than the bug now. Because how is it able to get the prop2? Because I explained to you the JavaScript closure explanation that they shouldn't have had a updated closure because I only set the interval once. I never cleared the interval, the last interval, and set it again. So how is this working? And to understand that piece of code, I will explain to you by implementing use effect event myself. Yeah. So what if I had a use effect event polyfill, and I'm going to write this line and this code one by one. I take a callback, and the first thing I do is I create a ref, and I assign that ref separately in the next line as callback. I'm not passing it at the initialization. I'm always setting the ref to the new callback. Yeah. So if you know React, the ref is created once. Doesn't matter how many times this hook is run for that component. Use ref is like stable reference, but the current value can change. Yeah, and I can change it anytime. And I've chosen to always pick the latest callback and write it to the current value. And I'm returning a new function. And inside of that function, I choose to always um, call the most current value. I can't do callback here. I can't do this here. If I do it like this, then it's going to have the same state closure problem as before. But I always want the latest value of that ref. I want the current callback. Yeah. So now this starts working. So what happens here is when the function runs the first time, I get a reference to this function here with prop2 is equal to 1, and I set the interval just once. Yeah, the interval is still set only once. This use effect only runs once. But on the next change to prop2, I run use effect polyfill event, which goes and updates the internal pointer to the callback. It like changes the internal pointer to the new callback, and I get a new function which I discard. I don't use it at all. It is still the old function that is still being used, but it works because it is using the current value, which now points to the new callback. So it kind of completely ignored the new tick function here. Like that thing is just discarded. And internally, this trickery is done to point to the new function. And this is how it works. So that took a lot of time to explain. So this code looked pretty simple. I wouldn't have written it this way in first shot, I guess. But in a closer look at this code, this is doing some extra tricks to get the code right. So the question here is, yes, this looks shorter, it looks simpler, but I think many of us wouldn't have written it this way in the first shot. Yeah, I think many of us would have just written it this way. Like you just need a use effect here. Because it's tightly coupled. In this specific case, it's tightly coupled. And this works. There's no problems here. It's just that when prop2 comes along and um, you're now supposed to change this code, then people would be struggling a little bit. Yeah. And to come up with the solution, it might take a bit while. Yeah, use callbacks doesn't work. So my first solution was use a callback, put a BPM, put prop2 there, and then ESLint is going to scream at you put tick here. But this is buggy. This is not correct behavior as what we wanted, because every time prop2 changes, the effect is going to run. It's going to first clear the previous interval and set a new interval, and that's not what we wanted, right? So um, BPM, we wanted the console log to run at a very specific time interval. And what we have introduced as a bug is that when prop2 changes, a new interval is set, the previous one is cleared. So your timer starts again from 0 randomly just because prop2 changed. And that is not the initial behavior that you are looking for. So even this use callback solution is wrong. Yeah. Finally, you probably would end up with either use effect event or any equivalent hook for that. Again, internally, like you probably would build your own polyfill or something. That's how you'd end up with similar solution. Yeah. But yeah, this code wasn't that easy or straightforward as you initially thought it was. For me at least, it was not that straightforward when I looked at it. On the other hand, the remix one, even though it's more verbose, it turns out to be more straightforward. Like, yes, there's more code, but there's no magic happen. Yeah. But here also, I think uh, code could have been um, like more terse than this. I don't think you need to do this make interval here and another one here. So here's my alternate solution. So see, the first time when the render function runs, it it already sends the first props, the setup props as well. It has to, right? Otherwise, it can't get the JSX. So this function runs during initialization and for future updates as well. So why not just combine the setup here? If props is what you want to react to, then might as well put the setup here itself. So what I'm doing here is not having a setup props function like a property here. I'm rather in the setup scope putting BPM equal -1, interval equal to -1. I'm creating a tick function which just does the console log and nothing else. This signal piece, oh yes, I forgot to explain that. Just ignore it for now. I'll come back to the signal one. So the first thing I do here is props.bpm not equal to bpm, and this should work because bpm is -1, and hopefully the user sends bpm which is not -1. He should be sending something greater than 0, right? So for because of that logic, this will run, and bpm will be the new value, which is 1000. There's nothing to clear the first run. It sets the interval, and the same thing again, like if bpm changes, this won't match here. The new bpm is set, the previous interval is cleared, and a new interval is created. I think this works. Yeah. Let me come to the signal part. I didn't explain that properly, I guess. So when a component unmounts, you need to clear the interval. And in React, when a component unmounts, the use effects return value gets executed, right? This clear interval. The equivalent in Remix is this dot signal. Now, this has nothing to do with framework specific signal like solid signal or any other signal implementation. There's nothing to do with that signal. The signal here is abort signal, which is a web API. And the abort signal has a flag called aborted. So every interval he is checking whether it's aborted or not. If it is aborted, he goes and clears the interval. So that's how he knows, or rather, the remix sets this to aborted when the component unmounts. That's the purpose for this dot signal. But because this is a web API, I think you can also listen to the abort event instead of putting it there. I could have done the same actually. I could have done this, but I chose to not pollute the the thing that I wanted to run, the effect that I wanted to run. I'd rather have the unmount logic separate, which listens to the abort event and which clears the interval here. So yes, there is a little bit of duplication with two clear intervals here. This is much more verbose than this, but I guess this is way more clearer than the trickery which use effect event does. Maybe I'm feeling it this way because I'm seeing this recently. Maybe over time I will get more used to this, but it still feels off because you're taking the normal expectation of JavaScript closures and then you bring it back with a hook. Yeah. So it's a convoluted way of bringing back like what you would expect from a JavaScript closure. Yeah. Um, but like I would still think that this is pretty tough. And the first snippet which Cherokee um, shared was the library, and the library was called use hook ts, and it had a hook called use interval, and he used that. And this is even more shorter, and that's pretty nice actually. React can give you like very short utility functions like this, and I don't think Remix can be this short. You can create utilities if you want to with Remix, but I don't think it's going to be this short. Yeah, it's terse, like three lines of code, and you got it. Yeah, so that's still nice part about React. Yeah. So I guess there is two groups of people. Some people like the short code that React gives. Some people like the explicit, no magic solution of Remix. I think I fall in this camp. I like being a little bit more explicit. This kind of code gets complicated over time. Like you have to think quite a bit, get all your dependencies and all that right. Especially when the code gets longer. Yeah, like when you're doing something complicated. I would prefer this, I guess. Yeah, but that's my preference. There is lots of other things about Remix that I don't know. Like I have no opinion right now. They have the event system, which is interesting. This is like Remix is like somewhere between jQuery and React in that regard. Yeah, like all for the past 5-6 years of my career, I was like only relying on single event, like on click, on mouse up or on key up or whatever. Yeah, but now the mental model has changed with Remix as they're using events directly. Yeah, which is interesting. I don't know how I would feel that if I were writing vanilla JS, I had no option, right? I would be dealing with the event system of the DOM directly. But this is another layer on top of that. That there is custom events and all that. It is also still DOM custom events, but it's integrated into something that is partly looking like React, right? So it's a middle ground between, like someone mentioned that it's a middle ground between jQuery and React, and that's interesting. I don't know how that would turn out until I write a complicated component myself from scratch. I wouldn't know how that feels. But yeah, tell me what your opinion is. Um, is this better or is this better? What do you prefer? Everyone has a preference. There's no right or wrong as such. These are trade-offs, and um, like people are getting into name calling and all that. Like, don't get into that. Like, look at the code, and you can criticize. You criticize my code as well if you want to. Uh, and in the end, everyone has their own preference. Like, what vibes with you? And tell me, what do you like? That's it about for this video.